Hey, welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, the 2025 edition, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Accessibility Cloud, and Intopia. If you do the social media thing, you can follow us on Mastodon, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. If you have questions for our presenters, post them using the ID24 hashtag, or alternatively, you can use the YouTube chat. We'll gather your questions for our Q&A session at the end of this talk. As a reminder, ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. I'm absolutely thrilled now to be joined by my fellow guest host, Rob. Rob, over to you.
Hi everyone, welcome whatever time zone you happen to be in at the moment. Andy is someone who has been around accessibility, particularly around the UK for many years now, and a man I admire and look up to. And so it makes me very excited to be able to say that I'm looking forward to finding out what he's been doing on mobile apps at the BBC. So Andy, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Rob. Very kind intro, very touched. I didn't know you were going to say that, but thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Andy Ronksley. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an accessibility specialist at the BBC. The talk we're doing today, I've called it Embedding Accessibility into the Next Generation of BBC Apps. I've got a couple of images on this slide. The first is a logo for our app design system. It's a thick line shaped like a house, and it has a color gradient, yellows, oranges, and blues. And then I've also got the BBC Digital Accessibility logo, which is three white blocks with the letters BBC in them in capital letters in black. And then the phrase digital accessibility underneath in capitals, also in white. So I'm talking to you today from Salford in the UK. This was a photo I took on GAD, actually, Global Accessibility Wednesday in May this year. It was a sunny day, which is quite rare in Salford, but this is the view from the office. So we have the River Irwell running through Media City. The building in the foreground, that's quite funky shaped, is the Imperial War Museum. And then in the background, if you're a football fan, you can also see Old Trafford, which is where Manchester United play. I'm not a Manchester United fan. I support Blackburn Rovers. If you're also a Blackburn fan, please say hello in the chat. There's not many of us, so we definitely need to be friends. So I'm just going to give a little bit of context about the BBC in case you haven't heard of us. So we are the British Broadcasting Corporation. We're the world's largest public sector service broadcaster. Our mission is to act in the public interest, serving all audiences through the provision of impartial, high quality, and distinctive output and services, which inform, educate, and entertain. So those are our three main goals: to inform, educate, and entertain. And we believe we can only achieve that if our content and products are truly accessible to all. There's an image on this slide as well. It's the BBC logo. This is the sign outside our headquarters in London. The BBC is bound by something called a Royal Charter. Although the Charter doesn't specifically mention accessibility, it talks about serving all audiences and having content and products that reflect the diverse communities of the UK. So you can interpret those words to include accessibility and disabled audience members. And we certainly do that. So yeah, why do we think we need an app design system? ADS for sure. It doesn't have a fancy name. It might do in the future. But yeah, app design system, ADS. So the BBC, we have quite a wide range of technology platforms. In mobile, we have two platforms, iOS and Android, 6 apps, so 6 different product offerings, and available on multiple device types, so phones, tablets, watches, for example. So a wide technology landscape. And we know that people get more value from the BBC when they consume more of our content in more places. So we are working towards more of a more integrated BBC. Right now, the apps are quite they're quite siloed, really. They don't really talk to each other too much, but there is work to try and bring that together a little bit more. But it's difficult because we're often doing similar things, but in quite different ways. So on this slide, I've got a collage of screenshots. From about 6 months ago, I've intentionally left these out of date because it helps to remind me like the progress that's being made. My colleague Sam took these for me about 6 months ago. So the 6 products, news, sport, weather, bite size, which is children's educational content, sounds, and iPlayer. So if you have a look, you'll notice like the headers are very different, for example. So sometimes the account button is on the left, sometimes it's on the right. Some of the apps say menu in text, some of them use a hamburger icon. Some of them have bottom navigations, some don't, like weather at the time, weather now does. But yeah, all of the apps were just very different, no real consistency, which it doesn't help users in general, and it certainly doesn't help people using assistive technologies to access the apps because it's harder to build up a mental model of how things should be working. So yeah, there was definitely an opportunity for us to just bring this together a bit more, make it more familiar, make it more consistent. So yeah, that was a piece of work that started about 18 months ago, I think now. And what we're talking about today is kind of, yeah, that journey so far. It's an ongoing journey. So I wanted to quickly touch on the technologies that we use for our apps. Technically, our apps are hybrid. They are mostly native, but we do use web views in places to deliver some content. So I guess technically they are hybrid apps. New development is done in latest technologies. So on Apple, we use Swift and Swift UI. On Android, we use Kotlin and Jetpack Compose. Like most big organizations, though, there are parts of the apps that are older. And so there's still some legacy frameworks used. So for Apple, there's still some UIKit stuff floating about. On our Android apps, still some XML view stuff floating about. So a bit of a mishmash of technologies, as you know, can happen in big organizations. Wanted to also talk about the ADS team and just how we've been working in the last 18 months. So we have a core team of multidisciplinary full-time BBC staff. I've represented that on the slide by a small blue circle with the words core team within it. There's also then a wider steering group of product representatives. So I mentioned we have these 6 products. So there's representatives from each of those products. And then other specialists. So for example, accessibility team, we sit in this wider steering group. So I've represented that on the slide by a bigger blue circle called steering group, which kind of encompasses the core team. New pieces of work, like if it's a big initiative, we try to kick those off by having an in-person or hybrid meeting of the whole core team and steering group. We have right now what we call weekly sync and share meetings to share progress and updates with each other. And every month, the core team and the steering group will meet. So the steering group is brought in every month at least. We're kind of involved a little bit more frequently than that. There's asynchronous work that's happening all the time in the usual collaboration tools. So myself and my colleagues were kind of involved with this stuff on a weekly basis, really. But that's kind of how we've organized ourselves. That structure and the format has changed a little bit in the 18 months, but that's pretty much reflective of where we are today. One of the first things we did with ADS was to think about what we wanted our guiding principles to be. We have 4 of them. The first one is native first. I'll explain these in a bit more detail. Second is adaptable. Third is familiar. And then the fourth is accessible. So these are our North Stars that we want for our app design system. So native first, this is our approach to consistency across our BBC app experiences. For us, it's about using the appropriate design patterns and technologies from iOS and Android as a starting point. So historically, our apps have not really used the components that Apple and Google give us. Most stuff has been kind of custom built. That means that the apps look consistent across iOS and Android, but it also means they don't necessarily look at home on each of those platforms. Like they don't look like an Apple app or they don't look like a Google app. So pros and cons to that. But yeah, historically, we've kind of done stuff more custom. Going forward, the approach is to kind of move away from that and to reuse more of the stuff that Apple and Google give us. That'll mean that the apps will diverge in appearance. They're going to look different on the different platforms, which we're okay with that. And hopefully users will be okay with that too. The slightly longer version of this principle is native first, but custom when we need to. So we will build something custom if we feel like we have a good use case to do that. But first and foremost, we'll try and use what Apple and Google give us. yeah, so as I said, we will build something custom if we have a good reason to. The second principle is adaptable. I'm going to call out the image on this slide because I wanted to add a chameleon emoji and there isn't one. The closest I could find was a gecko. So I thought a chameleon would be adaptable. But yeah, there is no chameleon emoji. So if anyone can make that happen, please do. Yeah, so adaptable. We have, as I say, 6 core apps, news, sport, weather, iPlayer, sounds, and bite size across 2 platforms, iOS and Android, multiple modes, light, dark, increased contrast, and device types, mobile, tablets, wearables, in-car, TV. So our technology landscape is very wide, very varied, and whatever we build from an app design system point of view needs to be adaptable to all of that. Needs to be adaptable as well to future platforms. And also, as I say, if the BBC integrates its apps more in the future, we need to kind of be mindful of like what might happen in the future. So yeah, adaptable is one of our guiding principles. Familiar was our third one. Familiar in 2 different senses. So the first is more familiarity and consistency across our suite of apps, 6 at the minute. As I highlighted at the start, very inconsistent right now. We're moving hopefully towards a path where, there's more consistency across the apps, which we think will benefit everyone. But then also, as I touched on, more familiarity to the host operating system. So as I say, right now, the apps don't necessarily feel at home on either platform. But going forward, we hope that they will feel more at home on the respective host operating system. Last one is accessible. So we aim to design and build experiences that are accessible for all. And we think leaning into native first means that we'll get a lot of accessibility features for free. So I'm sure we all know, if you use native components, a lot of the hard work is done for you, and that's the same. The same is true on mobile. And then whenever we choose to diverge from that, if we choose to build something custom, we'll obviously ensure that we do all of the accessibility hard work that we need to make sure that that is as equally as accessible as a native component. The image on this slide is of the accessible icon. If you haven't seen that before, it's worth having a look at the website. It's a really interesting story how that came about. So it's accessibleicon.org. Yeah, definitely worth having a look if you haven't seen that before. So I just wanted to give an example as well of the power of having these principles. Like having accessible as a principle can be really beneficial down the line. It gives you something to refer back to, particularly when you're wrestling with these difficult design and implementation decisions, which invariably will happen. So one example that we had at one point was when we were working on content cards. Our content cards come in different shapes and sizes. The small ones are particularly constrained on space, and we try to include, or we have to include quite a bit of information in quite a small area. So this is one for a program called the Traitors. So there's a badge to say it's live, the time of the program, 9 till 10 p.m., the episode number, a little bit of synopsis, a button to watch it, and then also a menu item as well. There was a design exploration to understand if we could use the image in the card to provide the program name. So in this example, the program is called the Traitors. So it's only included in the image as text, saved us a bit of space, but I guess we all know text embedded in an image is not great for accessibility. Okay for a screen reader, like we could have given this an accessible label to make sure it was read out, but from a visual point of view, it would have meant the user didn't have the ability to resize that text, the contrast as well. For example, they won't be able to increase the contrast. And also just the general typography. So this particular program, the word traitors is in quite a stylized font, perhaps not the most readable compared to like regular system text. So it was something we explored because we're really constrained on space, but we were like, we just can't do this because it has, 2 or 3 accessibility downsides, and that would be like betraying one of our guiding principles. So yeah, if you are working on a design system like this and you're able to have accessibility as a core principle, it can be really beneficial for you. Another thing that we've kind of been experiencing in the last 18 months is that this piece of work is it's a balancing act. I personally kind of see that we're trying to balance three things. One is the BBC brand, and in particular, because we have six different products, we have six different brands effectively. Each of them have a different brand color. We're also trying to balance accessibility considerations. And then because we're trying to be more native to iOS and Android, we're also trying to balance the platform guidelines for each of those platforms. So each of these three things are kind of pushing and pulling it on each other. And sometimes they're kind of in harmony and synchronized with each other. And there are times when they're kind of pulling in opposite directions, and we need to figure out what's the best path forward. So I've got a few examples of where we've kind of encountered those challenges and some of the decisions that we made. Since I first gave this talk, I did a version in March in CSUN. Since then, a few things have come along, so namely Liquid Glass from Apple, and also Material 3 Expressive, which is Google's new design language. Yeah, so some of these examples I've updated to include some of the kind of new things that we've been encountering with this new stuff that's come along since I first did this. A couple of headlines. Some things got better with Liquid Glass and Material Design 3 Expressive. I think Liquid Glass in particular has taken a lot of heat from the accessibility community, and I think a lot of that is justified. I've got one example of something where I think it has got a bit better though, just to try and be a bit optimistic. But then definitely new problems have arrived as well. So a couple of emojis on this slide as well. Red hearts for things that got better, and then the shocked face for new problems that have arrived. So the first example is I talked about native first, but custom when we need to. So Apple in particular, for your app headers, they recommend that you don't have like a solid color at the top of your app. They like the app header to be very kind of stripped back, minimal, and basically have no background color at all. So we kind of mocked up a few designs, what that would look like, but still kind of including our brand colors. So this particular example is for sport. Sports brand color is yellow, which is notorious for getting good color contrast out of it. So this is an example where we just had the BBC logo in yellow. So it's yellow blocks with the letters BBC in block capitals in white. Contrast is really poor. We were like, the accessibility team was like, we can't really go out with this. It just gives people a terrible first impression. I asked the question, can we make the letters BBC black at least? And I learned that the BBC brand guidelines are that those letters are to be transparent. So the way the BBC logo works is the blocks are colored, but the actual lettering is just see-through and it will take on the background color. So from a brand point of view, the answer was no, they didn't want to do that because it would deviate from the brand guidelines. So what we decided to do was to deviate from the platform guidelines. So we were like, okay, well, Apple says no colored headers, but that's causing us problems. So we're going to deviate from what Apple suggests. So the BBC Sport app still retained its yellow header, and the logo is then in black blocks, which means the letters are yellow. So contrast is much better. So from our point of view, we were happy with that. BBC News also retained its app header. News's brand color is red. So those two apps did retain a colored header, which deviates from those platform guidelines. So we were happy. We thought, okay, that's the compromise. But then when Liquid Glass came along, this kind of decision kind of resurfaced. And I have a video on the next slide. It's a silent video. I'll let the video play and then I'll explain what's going on. So this is a video of the BBC News app on iPad. On iPads, your navigation bar will float up into the app header. So at the top is our navigation. It just does 3 items at the minute: home, my news, and a search. And it's floated up on top of this red app header. I'll play the video and then I'll explain what the video shows. Okay, so what the video showed is that these liquid glass elements really do not like being on top of a solid colored app header. Apple do say this in their documentation, and our teams have been talking to Apple about this, and they basically said the root cause of the problem is this colored app header. These liquid glass elements have some kind of clever engineering to try and understand what content is underneath and kind of dynamically change the foreground colors and like the level of opacity to keep things legible. But that implementation is just not expecting a solid app header, a solid colored app header up there at the top. So what you will hopefully have seen in the video is that at times things just became really unlegible. So like the selected items were like red text on a red background. And then at some point, all of the text became white. At the end of the video here, now the foreground text has become black for some reason, and the actual glass element itself has taken on a sort of very sort of faint pink hue. But it's really just, it's all over the place, you know, depending on what thing you select. Everything was kind of changing wildly, like really disorientating, really distracting. So not something we could go live with for sure. As I say, the teams have been speaking to Apple. Apple will say the root cause of the problem is that we have a colored app header. If we were to remove that, it would probably make our lives much easier. But as I said earlier, like we kind of retain that to help us with contrast in some scenarios and also brand recognition. So we don't have a way forward with this one at the minute. It's certainly going to block our news and sports app from going live with much in the way of liquid glass on Apple's platforms. But yeah, just wanted to kind of flag that in case other people might encounter the same problem. You know, if you have an app that has a colored header, be aware that yeah, you might run into some issues like that. Okay, so the next example is for BBC Sounds, and this is about the bottom navigation for BBC Sounds. So this is a screenshot of how the BBC Sounds navigation used to look before this work started. So it was a custom component. The legibility is pretty good. So we've got kind of 5 tabs. Color contrast is quite good. Not perfect. So the selected tab is indicated pretty much just by color. So the icon is orange and the other icons are black. So definitely not perfect. But that's kind of where we started from. We wanted to switch that out though for Apple's kind of standard navigation component or standard tab bar. The second screenshot is what that looked like when we did that. You'll probably notice that the unselected items have a very significant drop in contrast to where we started from. So at the time, yeah, Apple's kind of out of the box tab bar had quite low contrast for these unselected items. That's just how it was out of the box. You'll probably know Apple do have options to increase contrast, which helps, but the out of the box design is pretty low contrast in places. I mentioned at least one thing I think got a little bit better with liquid glass, and this was the example. So this third screenshot is kind of an internal build of BBC Sounds with some liquid glass applied. This is what the navigation potentially could look like. So the unselected tabs have much better contrast than they used to pre-liquid glass. Probably one other benefit as well is we're not just kind of relying on color anymore, I would say. So the selected tab still uses color, but it kind of has this kind of lozenge shape around it as well. So there's another design element that helps to indicate which is the selected item. So whilst liquid glass has taken quite a bit of heat, this is certainly one thing where when I saw this, I was like, yeah, maybe that is a bit better than where we came from. Yeah, so just though like transparency in general, I think we know can cause problems for accessibility. Again, a couple of screenshots here. This is the BBC Sounds app, kind of as it stands today on iOS. So it has a standard Apple tab bar at the bottom now, which has a little bit of transparency to it. And yeah, the contrast down there can change pretty easily. So the first screenshot is the My Sounds screen, which is predominantly white content. So the contrast is a little better there. But then if the user just flicks over to the next tab, search, the search tab at the minute has quite a monochromatic design. There's a lot of dark colored tiles, and that dark color really affects the bottom navigation. So the contrast does drop quite significantly just as the user changes from one tab to the other. kind of zoomed in on those screenshots a little bit so you can kind of see the effects in a bit more detail. Yeah, so that top one is what things look like when you're on My Sounds, but then just swapping over to search, contrast does drop quite significantly. So this is just the out of the box stuff. We know users might choose to turn on reduce transparency, increase contrast, because Apple will give you that stuff, but we really kind of want users to have the best experience that they can out of the box, just without having to kind of, repair or fix things in the settings. So yeah, that was a challenge that we had certainly with sounds and trying to move to a native component. The challenges have kind of continued, I would say, with Liquid Glass. This is another video, another silent video. So I'll play this and I'll explain what's going on. If you're able to see it, I would kind of keep your eye at the bottom of the screen. So this is an example of what's called a mini player. It's another native component. I think it's like a tab panel accessory it's called or something like that, or a tab bar accessory. Yeah, so it's like a mini player. I think Apple Music has the same thing. It's a liquid glass element. Yeah, so I'll play the video and we'll kind of see what happens. Okay, so that was the end of the video. You hopefully would have seen that liquid glass element. It's trying to dynamically figure out what state it should be in, whether it should be in like a light state or a dark state, and whether the text should be white or dark. And it does that by looking at the content that's underneath it. But on an index page like this, where there's a lot of content cards, it seems to get confused very easily. So, some of these cards are quite small. So it's sitting on top of multiple cards, and some of those cards might be light, one might be dark. And it just seems like in practice on an index page in particular, it just doesn't really work very well. So there's definitely instances, hopefully you would have seen, where the text becomes invisible basically momentarily. And then it kind of, as you keep scrolling, it kind of figures itself out again. But it's it's a really jarring experience, really disorientating. Yeah, so a challenge for us for sure. Oops, sorry. Another thing that we have found to be a challenge at the minute, we haven't figured out a workaround for this, is some of the work we did around the app header was to try and get a more consistent style and location for the settings for the app. So if you recall the first screenshot, everything was different. Sometimes it's called menu, sometimes it's like a little person icon. We settled on using like a blue circle with the initial of the user that signed in. So in this screenshot, it's a blue circle with the letter B. You press on that, and that's where you'll find your account settings, the app settings, for example. Liquid Glass, that button visually wasn't 44 by 44 points, which is what Apple recommends. But the target area around it was 44 by 44. So visually it was kind of smaller, but the actual active area around it was 44 by 44. What we found though when we moved to liquid glass was the liquid glass kind of element around it took up that whole 44 by 44 points. So things became like visually unbalanced. We kind of had this big glassy circle and just a kind of small blue circle in the middle of it. So visually kind of looked unbalanced. Yeah, not something we anticipated, and definitely be interested in it if anyone else has found the right way to do this, to have just target space or hit space around something that's not taking on the glass effect. What we've had to do in the interim is drop the target size of this. So it's no longer 44 by 44. I think it's currently 32 by 32, just to keep the visual balance. So it's still above what Apple recommends as a minimum. But, we'd really like to get it back up to where it was. We just need to find the right solution to that. Yeah, so I'd be interested if anyone's come across that. But another one, maybe be aware, if you had invisible target space around elements, liquid glass might cause you a problem there, or we might just not be doing the right thing. I'm definitely interested to hear people's thoughts on that one. So with some of this stuff, we were like, let's see what Apple's doing. So we had a look at the Apple News app. So a couple of screenshots here. On the index page, again, they have content cards. We noticed that their bottom navigation seemed to be more frosted, more opaque. And then when you went into an article, maybe where the page is less busy from a visual point of view, it seemed to be more transparent. So we were like, okay, maybe that's the approach. Use a more frosted style on an index page with content cards, and then a bit more glassy when it's a kind of visually less busy page. So we're like, okay, that's the way forward. But then another colleague looked at the same app and it was inversed. On his app, the index page was more transparent. And when they went into an article, the navigation was more frosted. None of them had any of the accessibility settings turned on, but we're like, okay, so it's not as simple as we thought. The only conclusion we came to at the minute is that this is all just happening dynamically. So these elements are looking at what content they're sitting on top of, and it's dynamically deciding how transparent it should be or how frosted it should be. And it just kind of seems to be a bit potluck almost. It's kind of hard to pin down what it's going to look like at any moment in time. So yeah, again, flagging that, we thought we'd kind of found a way forward following Apple's approach, but yeah, wasn't quite that simple. So what we're doing with sounds at the minute, potentially, and this is all internal at the minute, but with the mini player, we've kind of overridden this out-of-the-box glass material and made it more frosted. I don't know the technical name of the material that we're using. This is the screenshot I was sent a couple of days ago. Yeah, so we're kind of trying to make that more opaque just to help with this legibility issue, because out of the box, it just doesn't seem to be working for us right now. And I say, as far as possible, we want to avoid users having to go in and turn settings on. We want the default experience to be as good as it can be, but we are ceding some control to Google and Apple, because of this native first approach. So talked quite a bit about Apple so far. I want to talk about Google a bit more now. So Google released Material 3 Expressive recently. And from some of the look I've had, Google seems to be baking in a little bit more accessibility, I would say, out of the box. Google's material design doesn't have a stellar record for accessibility, but right now, at least, some of the decisions they're making are quite interesting, I think, seem to be prioritizing accessibility. Probably the worst example of something from the past was, I think, Material Design 1, where they had form fields that just had a bottom border. They removed the other three borders. It kind of just looked like an underline. So very strict back, very minimal. And that was a design aesthetic that proliferated across the web and apps for a while, and I think sort of negatively impacted usability and accessibility. Over the years, Google has kind of walked that back now. Yeah, so it's kind of quite refreshing to see some of these defaults that I've seen in Material 3 Expressive. So the first one is nav bars. So Apple's nav bars we've looked at the transparency and how that can impact legibility. Google, in comparison, or Android is just much more opaque. So this is the weather app. It now has a bottom navigation bar. Standard component from Google, fully opaque, so contrast is really good. Second example was Material 3 Expressive did start adding a bit more transparency across the operating system. Historically, I think Android has been very opaque to the point where it doesn't actually have a setting to reduce the transparency because they didn't really use it anyway. But I had heard that Material 3 Expressive was going to start introducing some transparency. So I was interested to see whether a new accessibility setting would arrive, similar to what Apple has to reduce the transparency. The answer is there is still no setting, because what Google seem to do is wherever you need to read something, they seem to prioritize legibility. So this is an example of the notification screen. There is a subtle amount of transparency on this, but whenever there's a notification, it's opaque, so the contrast of the text is really good. Yeah, so an interesting, just different approach, I would say, to Apple's. Another thing that I noticed, which kind of made me happy, was the way that they do switches. If you're familiar with iOS, you'll probably know there's another accessibility setting called differentiate without color. And one of the things that we'll do is add a little icon to your switches to indicate whether it's switched on or switched off. If you don't have that on, it's purely just whether it's kind of green or not. So it kind of relies on color out of the box. Again, Android doesn't have that setting because they kind of just do it for you out of the box. So the switches in Android Material Tree Expressive already have a little cross or a little tick. So it uses color, but it also uses an icon. So yeah, things just kind of feel a little bit more accessible out of the box. So Android certainly in the last 18 months, from a design point of view, has been given us, I would say, less challenges than iOS has. So one other thing I want to talk about, I mentioned our apps are hybrid in nature. We've encountered some challenges with web views and how they work. In iOS, we found that web views, they don't automatically inherit the system level text size. So if the user set dynamic type size, that should apply to your native screens, but it doesn't automatically apply to web views. And because some of our article types are delivered via web view, that means that they don't resize. And users complain to us about that. They're like, why does 75% of your app resize, but these articles don't? And we know the technical reason why, but users, they don't care. It's just an article to them. So they want it to resize. Apple's suggestion is to have like a site-specific text size control to do this. So Apple's suggestion is within the web view, you have a control to resize text there, or you can provide your own control. We don't necessarily think that's the best experience. Like for our audience, we would like them to just be able to set it once at the system level and then have it apply to all of our articles. So we have put a technical workaround in place to do that for users. So we have some native code that's listing out for text size changes, and we pass some stuff over and inject it into the web view to kind of kick the web view into respecting that setting for the user. So we've kind of done a little bit of technical stuff in the background to try and do the hard work for the user. Interestingly, what we noticed on Android is Android web views do inherit the system level text size. So the screenshot here is an Android device with the text size set to the maximum. And this web view, it's inherited that text size. So we don't have to do the workaround there. One of the things we've learned recently is that web views on either platform inherit the bold text setting. So we're going to have to do another technical workaround for that, I think, because again, we want to respect the user's bold text setting if they have that turned on. But yeah, neither iOS or Android apply that to a web view. So web views come with some challenges out of the box. You kind of work around them with a little bit of custom code. And that's what we're trying to do to try and improve things. One other thing that was a decision, I guess, made a long time back that has kind of become an interesting blocker for us is brand. So iPlayer uses a dark theme for adult accounts. So iPlayer has always been black with like a pink accent color. And I didn't know this until I started at the BBC, but if you create a child account, it has a white theme. So it's white with pink. And that is used to differentiate between an adult and a child account. That has presented as a challenge in supporting light and dark themes for different profiles. I guess this decision was made before sort of dark mode and dark themes was really a common thing. But right now, at least, that's challenging for us because it's used as a brand differentiator, which means, on the kids profile, for example, we can't really support dark mode right now because then it looks like an adult theme. And yeah, that's a challenge that we definitely need to rethink, I would say. I wanted to share that because it's kind of tied into these Apple accessibility and nutrition labels, which I'll talk about shortly. One of the final things I want to talk about is optimizing user experience. So our apps are very heavy on content cards, and they have multiple interactive elements within them. For assistive technologies, wanted to make sure that people were able to navigate the apps as easy as possible and as efficiently as possible. So if they're just using swipe gestures to go through a content card, might take a few swipes if all of the elements are interactive. And with the apps just being so heavy on content cards, we weren't sure if that was the right approach. That kind of is how the apps work mostly right now. Going forward, though, what we're thinking is that each card will become a single focusable element and that the actions within the card will be exposed as custom actions. So The main action of the card will be available like on a double tap, but then the secondary actions in a context menu, maybe it's add to watch list or share with someone, they will become custom actions. So we're trying to strike a balance, I guess, between allowing people to navigate things effectively, but still have access to everything. So we recognize that custom actions is a slightly more complex way of navigating. So maybe it will introduce a bit of a learning curve for users, but we hope that that will pay off in the long term if our apps are something that will be used on a daily or weekly basis, which we hope they are. So that was trying to optimize user experience. So kind of to sum up this section, what are we aiming for? We're trying to strive for sensible defaults, making the core design as accessible as possible. We want to ensure that we respect all operating system level accessibility settings because we're not doing that consistently at the minute. Potentially, we might add a thin layer of custom code on top of some native components. So for example, on iOS, when you reduce transparency, it doesn't fully remove it, it just reduces it as the name implies. Potentially, we might decide to make things fully opaque if the user has turned that on, just to give them the maximum legibility. And then usability testing, where we do this stuff, we obviously need to put it in front of users, which we do. So very quickly, how we share this work internally. So we have 6 product teams to support. Our outputs at the minute are a Figma library and a sample app. This is a screenshot of the sample app. So the sample app serves 2 main purposes. One, it's a bit of a playground for experimenting with things. So things like the custom actions on content cards, for example, and also just like liquid glass allows us to experiment there. But it's also a mechanism for sharing with teams how we want this stuff to work and also give them a reference implementation. So yeah, the Figma library and the sample app are what we have for teams at the minute. We don't have a set of like ready-made components yet, like you might expect from a design system. Teams are taking like the reference implementation and then replicating it themselves. But yeah, hopefully that will improve in the future. Quick shout out to our guidelines. So our work on ODS will be built into the next generation of the BBC's accessibility guidelines. These are currently very out of date. So as a team, we're figuring out what the future looks like for them because they're badly in need of a refresh. They're still available to have a look at though, if you want to have a look. It's bbc.co.uk/accessibility/for products. Yeah, so anything that we learn from this work, it'll be incorporated into whatever those guidelines look like in the future. Last thing I'm going to quickly cover is Apple accessibility nutrition labels. These were announced in May 2025, just before GAD. They're optional for now. There are 9 features. Visual, the visual category has sufficient contrast, dark interface, larger text, differentiate without color alone, and reduced motion. Interaction category has voice control and voiceover. And then the media category has captions and audio description. So these labels allow you to indicate whether you support a feature or not. It's a yes or no answer, interestingly. So there's no partial support. It's a very binary thing, yes or no. The screenshot I'm showing is something I took from the Apple press release. It's showing if you say yes, you'll get a list of the features. If you say no, it just won't show you that feature. So the list will be shorter. You can include a link to an accessibility page with more details. But this yes or no approach, it's brought up an interesting discussion for us because if we think about like large text support, I've already explained that our apps support it for the most part, like maybe 75, 80%, but not completely. So Apple would like us to say no, according to their guidance, like unless it's full, then you're supposed to say no. But we're wondering if we say no, is that also misleading to the user? Because, it does support it. The majority supports it, but not full. So we're a little bit unsure on the way forward for that right now, whether to follow what Apple suggests we do, which is to be very hardline about it, or whether to just be a bit more lenient and so that users, have the slightly rosier picture. We're not sure what's the right approach right now. But be interested if anyone else has come across that or has had that discussion with these things. So that's it. Quick acknowledgements and thanks. Thanks so much for listening. So thank you to the whole core team and steering group. A few extra special thanks. Peter, Hiri, and Samboot from my team. Some of the work I presented is their work. From the core team, James Meller, Ed Goldman, Mark Fletcher, and Hugh Potter. Steering group, Caroline Gardner, Nathan Tekeste, Dominic Dauncey, and Adam Kane. Everything you've seen today is in part been with their help. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'll have a look in Slack, see if they're in there. And that's my email address if you want to get in touch. It's andrew.m.ronksley@bbc.co.uk, or you'll find me on LinkedIn as well. I think there's a link on the ID24 site. Yeah, and if you're ever in Salford, come and say hi. We can take you around the BBC office. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. That was really good, really interesting. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see it. Like, you know, the big organizations have just the same frustrations as everyone else, I think, with these things. Yeah, we only have a few minutes, but Rob, do we have any questions for Andy?
Yeah, I think it's probably safe to say that the YouTube chat is not necessarily a fan of liquid glass. I'll summarize it with that. But yeah, there is a question from Harrison Chambers who wants to know, do you have any staff within the teams with disabilities, and do they test with a disabled demographic?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. In the teams, we do have staff members with disabilities. The BBC has a scheme called BBC Extend. If any of you haven't heard of that, it's worth looking up. It's kind of how we proactively recruit staff members with disabilities. In terms of testing, yeah, some of that is done internally. Some of it is also done externally as well. So our team in particular, we have a couple of agencies that we work with as well. So if we're trying to do usability testing or user research, often that is done with the help of external agency. So probably yes to both of those questions, I think.
There is one question as well from One Love Skate Shop, which I thought was interesting. If you don't have any motion at all in your app, should you list reduced motion in the nutrition labels?
Oh, very good question. I'm not actually sure the answer on that one. Apple do have good documentation for all of this. If you have no motion, I'd probably say yes. Yeah, I guess that indicates to a user that this app has no motion, I guess. So I'd probably say yes. I don't know what Apple would say. I say Apple seem to be quite hardline about yeah, everything, the key flows in your app need to be perfect, pretty much. In order for you to say yes, which I don't disagree with, but also maybe misleading to the user if they don't see those things listed. Ideally, maybe if you could indicate partial support, that might be helpful, but that's not an option right now. So yeah, I think if I was in your position, I'd probably say yes, reduce motion.
Brilliant. Well, we're coming up to time, so thank you very much, Andy. It's great to hear what you've been up to, and very interesting to hear that you've been dealing with many of the same things that I think a lot of us who've been working on mobile apps over the summer have been dealing with. So yeah, thank you very much.
You're
I'm going to
welcome.
hand back to Ian.
Yeah, thank you once again, Andy. And thanks to Rob for co-hosting here. If you like this session, please hit the YouTube like button, and don't forget you can subscribe to our channel to be kept into the loop of any of our future events. Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks to our Platinum supporters, Accessibility Cloud and Intopia, our Silver supporters, Intuit, and our Bronze supporters, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Mantis & Co, and Vispro. We will be back with more ID24 at the top of the hour with our next session. So see you then. Thanks a lot.